The floorboards creaked beneath my bare feet as I made my way to the kitchen, a familiar late-night ritual when sleep refused to come. At 63, my body had developed its own schedule. Awake at 2 a.m., mind racing with memories I couldn't quite shake. The house felt too big, too empty, yet somehow suffocating with the weight of decades spent nurturing ungrateful souls. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. I had been living with my eldest son Dennis and his wife Sharon for 8 months now, ever since the stroke that had left me temporarily weakened, but far from defeated. They'd insisted I move in for my own good, their voices dripping with the kind of concern that feels more like obligation than love. The recovery had been swift, my speech clear, my mobility restored, but somehow the conversation about me returning to my own apartment never came up. The tea kettle whistled softly as I poured hot water over chamomile leaves, the steam rising like ghosts from my cup. Through the kitchen window, I could see the outline of my old Toyota Camry in the driveway, a faithful companion that had carried me through 40 years of independence. They'd suggested I shouldn't drive anymore, though my doctor had cleared me completely. "Just to be safe, Mom," Dennis had said, his hand on my shoulder with that patronizing weight I'd grown to despise. I settled into the breakfast nook, the same spot where I'd sat countless mornings, watching my children grow up in this very house, the house I'd bought with my late husband Steenie, the house I'd maintained through his long illness, the house I'd somehow never officially signed over to anyone despite what my sons seemed to believe. The muffled sound of voices drifted from the living room. Dennis and his younger brother Rudolph were having one of their late-night conversations, probably about work or their wives or the endless financial pressures that seemed to consume their every thought. I'd learned to tune them out, these midnight conferences that never included me despite being about me. But tonight, something in their tone made me pause, my cup halfway to my lips. "The hospital bills are crushing us," Rudolph's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. "Between Dad's cancer treatment and now Mom's stroke, we're buried." "I know," Dennis replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Sharon's been on my case about it constantly. She says we can't keep floating everything." I set my cup down carefully, my heart beginning to race. They were talking about money, my money, the medical bills I'd assumed they were handling out of kindness, not expecting repayment. Steenie had left me comfortable, his life insurance and our investments providing a cushion I'd never discussed with them in detail. "The thing is," Rudolph continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more clearly than before, "she's got that savings account, the one Dad set up. And the house? Christ, Dennis, she's sitting on a gold mine and acting like she's broke." "I know she's got money," Dennis said, and I could hear him pacing, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. "But getting her to access it is like pulling teeth. She's so stubborn about her independence." "Well, she's not independent anymore, is she?" Rudolph's laugh was bitter. "She's living in your house, eating your food, taking up space. Sharon's pregnant again, and you're going to need Mom's room for the nursery." The words hit me like a physical blow. Sharon was pregnant? And they were planning to take my room. The room I'd been told was mine for as long as I needed it? "Look," Dennis said, his voice taking on a conspiratorial tone that made my blood run cold. "Here's what we're going to do. We'll present her with all the bills, hospital, doctors, medications, everything. Make it clear that we've been covering her expenses out of our own pockets. She'll feel guilty enough to pay up. And then we suggest she sell the apartment. It's just sitting there empty, costing money in maintenance and taxes. We'll help her find a nice assisted living place, somewhere she can have friends her own age, activities, proper care." Rudolph laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "You mean somewhere she can be someone else's problem?" "Don't say it like that," Dennis protested weakly. "We're not abandoning her. We're just transitioning her to a more appropriate living situation." "Right. And in the meantime, she pays off our debts with her house money." "It's not like she needs it," Dennis said. "She's not going to live forever, and we're the ones who'll inherit anyway. This way, everyone wins." I pressed my hand to my mouth, afraid that the sound of my breathing might give me away. The casual cruelty of their words, the calculated nature of their plan. It was as if they were discussing a business transaction. not the fate of their mother. "What about the house?" Rudolph asked. "This house? What about it?" "Well, technically it's still in her name, isn't it? From when she bought it with Dad?" There was a long pause. I could practically hear Dennis's mental gears turning. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Yeah, it is. But she's been living with us, so we have a case for adverse possession if we need it. Or we could just not mention it. She's getting older. Her memory isn't what it used to be. By the time she realizes what's happening, it'll be too late." "Jesus, Rudolph." "What? I'm being practical. She's not going to need a 4-bedroom house in a nursing home, is she?" "Assisted living," Dennis corrected automatically. "Same difference. The point is, we solve all our problems at once. She pays our debts, we sell her apartment, we keep this house, and she gets the care she needs. It's win-win. When do we start?" "Tomorrow. I'll call that financial advisor she used to work with, get a better sense of what we're dealing with. You start looking at facilities. And Dennis, make sure Sharon's on board. We need to present a united front." "She will be. She's been pushing for this harder than anyone." Their voices began to fade as they moved toward the stairs. I sat frozen in my chair, the chamomile tea growing cold in my hands. The casual way they'd discussed my future, as if I were a piece of property to be liquidated, left me feeling hollow and strangely calm. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that I'd never been as helpless as they assumed. The stroke had been mild, but I'd let them baby me, let them think I was more fragile than I was. It had been easier than fighting their smothering concern, and part of me had been touched by their apparent devotion. Now I understood the truth. They weren't caring for me out of love. They were positioning themselves for a financial windfall. I rose from the table, my movements steady and purposeful. The house was silent now, my sons having retreated to their respective homes and bedrooms. In the darkness, I made my way to the small desk in the corner of the kitchen, where I'd kept my important papers since moving in. Everything was there: bank statements, investment records, insurance policies, and most importantly, the deed to this house. The deed that clearly showed my name as the sole owner, a fact that had somehow escaped my son's notice. Steenie had insisted on putting everything in my name when he was diagnosed, wanting to ensure I'd never be vulnerable or dependent on anyone. "You're stronger than you know, Louise," he'd whispered during one of our last conversations. "Don't let anyone make you feel small." I'd forgotten that strength in the months since the stroke, allowing myself to be diminished by their concern, their constant reminders of my limitations. But sitting in the darkness, surrounded by the echoes of their betrayal, I felt something awakening in me, something cold and calculating that I'd never known I possessed. My hands were steady as I gathered the papers, my mind already working through the implications of what I'd heard. They thought they were dealing with a confused, dependent old woman. They had no idea who they were really up against. The clock on the wall chimed 3 times, and I smiled in the darkness. They thought they had time to execute their plan, to manipulate me into compliance. But time was something they'd just run out of. I had work to do, and for the first time in months, I felt truly alive. The question now wasn't whether I would fight back. It was how devastating I was prepared to be. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen blinds as I sat at the same table where I'd discovered my son's treachery just hours before. My hands wrapped around a fresh cup of coffee, steam rising between my fingers like incense for the dead. Specifically the death of any maternal obligation I'd once felt toward Dennis and Rudolph. I'd spent the pre-dawn hours in my room, not sleeping, but planning. The important papers were now secured in a safety deposit box I'd opened years ago, one my sons knew nothing about. My laptop, a gift from Steny that they'd assumed I barely knew how to use, had been my companion through the night as I'd researched, calculated, and prepared for war. "Morning, Mom." Dennis shuffled into the kitchen, his hair disheveled, eyes puffy from too little sleep. He moved to the coffee maker with the lazy entitlement of a man who'd never questioned his right to everything around him. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said, keeping my voice neutral, almost frail. "Old habits." Sharon appeared in the doorway, her hand resting on her still flat belly in that performative way of early pregnancy. She was 34, 29 years younger than me, and had never bothered to hide her impatience with having an elderly mother-in-law underfoot. This morning, however, she wore a mask of artificial sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Louise, how are you feeling today?" She moved toward me with arms outstretched, as if to embrace me, but I remained seated, forcing her to pat my shoulder awkwardly instead. "Fine, dear, just fine." I let the word fine hang in the air with just enough weariness to suggest I was anything but. "Well, we have some wonderful news," Sharon continued, her voice bright with false cheer. "We're pregnant. Isn't that exciting?" I arranged my features into what I hoped was surprise and delight. "Oh my goodness, how wonderful! When are you due?" "March," Dennis said, joining us at the table. "It's still early, but we wanted to tell you first." First, as if I were special to them, as if they weren't planning to warehouse me in some sterile facility while they raised my grandchild in my house with my money. "I'm so happy for you both," I said, reaching across to squeeze Sharon's hand. Her fingers were cold, and she pulled away quickly. "A baby is such a blessing." "It is," Sharon agreed, "but it also means we'll need to make some adjustments." "Here it comes," I thought, maintaining my gentle smile. "The thing is, Mom," Dennis began, his voice taking on that careful tone people use when delivering bad news, "we're going to need to convert your room into a nursery. We've been thinking it might be time to explore some other living arrangements for you." "Other arrangements?" I let confusion color my voice, tilting my head slightly. "Well, you've recovered so well from your stroke," Sharon said quickly. "Really, it's amazing how strong you've become. We think you might be ready for more independence." "Independence?" I repeated the word as if it were foreign to me. "There are some wonderful communities for active seniors," Dennis continued. "Places where you can have your own space but also access to services if you need them. Social activities, organized meals, medical care on site." "You mean a nursing home?" "Assisted living," Sharon corrected. "It's completely different. Much more like an apartment complex, but with support services." I let the silence stretch between us, watching them squirm. Finally, I spoke, my voice small and uncertain. I don't know if I can afford something like that." "Those places are expensive, aren't they?" Dennis and Sharon exchanged a look, the kind of look that confirmed everything I'd overheard the night before. "Well, that's something we need to discuss," Dennis said. "We've been covering a lot of your expenses since you moved in. The medical bills, insurance co-pays, medications. It's been challenging." "Oh no," I whispered, pressing my hand to my chest. I had no idea. I thought insurance covered everything. "Insurance helps," Sharon said, "but there are still significant out-of-pocket costs. We have all the paperwork if you'd like to see it." "Of course I'll pay you back," I said immediately. I never meant to be a burden. I have my savings, and there's my apartment. "About your apartment," Dennis said, leaning forward slightly. "It's just sitting empty, costing money in maintenance and taxes. It might make sense to sell it." "Sell it?" I made my voice quaver slightly. "But that's my home. All my memories with your father?" "I know it's hard," Sharon said, her voice oozing false sympathy. "But you're not living there anymore, and the money could secure your future in a really nice assisted living community." I stared at them both. These two people who had spent months pretending to care for me while secretly plotting to rob me blind. The urge to reveal exactly how much I knew, to watch their faces crumble with the realization that they'd been caught, was almost overwhelming. Instead, I began to cry. Not the harsh, angry tears I felt inside, but the soft, defeated weeping of a confused old woman who'd just realized she was unwanted. I let my shoulders shake slightly, dabbed at my eyes with a napkin, and watched as they both shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. "Mom, please don't cry," Dennis said, reaching across to pat my hand. "We're not abandoning you. We're just trying to find the best solution for everyone." "I know," I managed between sniffles. I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who becomes a burden to her children." "You're not a burden," Sharon said quickly, though her tone suggested otherwise. "You're just at a different stage of life now." "Maybe you're right," I said, wiping my eyes. Maybe it is time for me to think about what comes next. Could you show me those bills? I want to understand what I owe you. Of course, Dennis said, relief flooding his voice. I'll get everything together this afternoon. And maybe you could help me look at some of those assisted living places? I want to make sure I choose somewhere nice, somewhere I can afford. Absolutely, Sharon said, her smile genuine for the first time that morning. I'll start researching options right away. Thank you both, I said, standing slowly as if the weight of age and sorrow made every movement difficult. I think I'll go rest for a while. This is all so much to process. Of course, Mom, Dennis said. Take all the time you need. I made my way to my room, maintaining the careful, shuffling gait of someone much frailer than I actually was. But once my door closed behind me, I moved to my laptop with the swift efficiency of someone who'd spent the night planning a campaign. The first email went to my bank, requesting an immediate transfer of funds to an account my sons couldn't access. The second went to my real estate agent, instructing her to quietly assess the value of both my apartment and this house. The third was to my lawyer, requesting an urgent meeting to discuss family matters. But the fourth email was the most important one. It went to Margaret Berman, my former colleague from the insurance company where I'd worked as a claims investigator for 30 years. Margaret had retired 2 years before me, but she still maintained connections in the industry. More importantly, she understood the art of uncovering information that people preferred to keep hidden. Margaret, I typed, I need your help with a delicate family matter. Can we meet for coffee this afternoon? I'll explain everything then, but I need someone with your particular skills to help me understand some recent medical bills. I have a feeling they might not be entirely accurate. I sent the email and sat back in my chair, a cold smile playing at my lips. If Dennis and Rudolph thought they could manipulate me with fabricated expenses and emotional manipulation, they were about to learn a very expensive lesson. My phone buzzed with a text from Rudolph. Heard the good news about the baby. Looking forward to seeing you tonight for dinner. Sharon's making your favorite pot roast. How thoughtful of them to soften me up with comfort food before they presented their fictional bills. I texted back, can't wait. So much to discuss. Indeed, there was. They thought they were manipulating a grief-stricken, confused old woman. They had no idea they were dealing with someone who'd spent 3 decades investigating insurance fraud, someone who knew every trick in the book when it came to financial deception. I opened my laptop again and began typing notes, documenting everything I'd overheard, every inconsistency in their story, every moment of false concern I'd witnessed. If they wanted to play games with my money and my future, I was more than prepared to play back. The difference was, I intended to win. And when I was finished with them, they'd understand exactly what it meant to underestimate Louise Morrison. The coffee shop on 5th Street buzzed with the afternoon crowd. But Margaret Berman and I had claimed a corner table that offered both privacy and a clear view of the entrance. Old habits from our investigative days. Always know who's coming and going. Always have an exit strategy. Margaret looked exactly as I remembered her. Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of posture that suggested she'd never met a problem she couldn't solve. She'd been my partner on dozens of fraud cases, and there was no one I trusted more to help me navigate the treacherous waters my sons had thrown me into. Louise, you look... And she paused, studying my face. Different, sharper, like you've woken up from a long sleep. Something like that, I said, pulling out a manila folder thick with documents. I need your expertise, Margaret. I think my sons are trying to defraud me. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Your sons? The ones who've been taking such good care of you? That's what I thought too. I slid the folder across the table. Until I overheard them planning to fabricate medical bills, force me to sell my apartment, and put me in a nursing home so they could keep my house. Margaret's expression shifted from surprise to professional interest as she opened the folder. Inside were printouts of my actual medical bills, bank statements, and insurance claims. Everything I'd compiled during my sleepless night of research. Jesus, Louise, she whistled softly as she scanned the documents. According to these records, your out-of-pocket expenses were minimal. Less than $3,000 total. That's what I thought. But Dennis is preparing to present me with bills that supposedly show I owe them tens of thousands. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. I need you to help me document everything. I want to be prepared when they make their move. Are you sure about this? Margaret asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. These are your children we're talking about. These are two grown men who see their mother as a financial opportunity, I replied, my voice steady and cold. They've spent months pretending to care for me while secretly planning to rob me blind. They're not my children anymore. They're criminals. Margaret nodded slowly, her investigator's instincts kicking in. What do you need me to do? I need you to verify every medical bill, every insurance claim, every expense they're going to claim. I want documentation that proves they're lying. And I need you to help me trace where their money is really going. Their money problems are real? Rudolph mentioned hospital bills from Steenie's cancer treatment. That was 3 years ago, and Steenie's insurance covered everything. If they're still paying medical bills, they're either lying or they've been incredibly irresponsible with their finances. Margaret pulled out her phone and started taking notes. I'll need access to your medical records, insurance policies, and any bills they've actually paid on your behalf. I have everything, I said, tapping another folder beside my chair. But there's something else. I need you to find out about their finances. Rudolph mentioned debts, and Sharon's been pushing hard for them to solve their money problems using my assets. That's trickier, but not impossible. Give me a few days. I don't have a few days, I said urgently. They're planning to present me with fake bills tonight at dinner. I need to know what I'm dealing with before I walk into that room. Margaret studied me for a long moment. Louise, what exactly are you planning to do with this information? I'm going to destroy them, I said simply. Not physically, not violently, but I'm going to make sure they understand there are consequences for treating their mother like a mark in a con game. And if they try to make amends? If they apologize? I thought about the casual cruelty in their voices the night before, the way they'd discussed my future as if I were livestock to be sold. Some things can't be forgiven, Margaret. They crossed a line, and they're about to learn what happens when you betray someone who spent 30 years investigating people just like them. Margaret smiled, a cold, professional expression I remembered from our most challenging cases. Give me 2 hours. I'll have preliminary findings by the time you sit down for dinner. We spent the next hour going through my documents systematically. Margaret photographed everything, cross-referenced insurance codes, and made a series of phone calls to contacts who still worked in the industry. By the time we finished, I had a clear picture of just how extensive my son's deception was going to be. They're going to inflate everything, Margaret confirmed, sliding a summary sheet across the table. Based on what you've told me about their conversation, they'll probably claim your stroke treatment cost $20,000 to $30,000 out of pocket. The real cost was $843. What about Steenie's cancer treatment? That's where it gets interesting. There were no outstanding bills from his treatment. Everything was paid in full by his insurance and Medicare. But, she paused, flipping through her notes. I found something else. Rudolph filed for bankruptcy 2 years ago, discharged about $60,000 in credit card debt. And Dennis? Clean credit, but he's been making minimum payments on substantial credit card balances. Recent purchases suggest he's been living beyond his means. Expensive dinners, luxury goods, a new car last month. I sat back in my chair, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. So they're not just trying to steal my money. They're desperate for it. Desperate people do desperate things, Margaret agreed. But Louise, be careful. If they're as financial trouble as this suggests, they might not react well when their plan falls apart. Let me worry about that, I said, gathering my papers. What I need from you is ammunition. Can you have everything documented and ready to present if necessary? Legal documentation? Louise, are you thinking of involving the authorities? I'm thinking of involving my lawyer. If they're willing to commit fraud against their own mother, they need to face consequences that go beyond family disappointment. Margaret nodded approvingly. I'll have a complete report ready by tomorrow morning. But for tonight, you'll have enough information to call them out on their lies. Perfect. I stood to leave, then paused. Margaret, there's one more thing. I need you to help me understand the legal implications of what they're planning. If they force me to sell my apartment and put me in a nursing home, what rights do I have? As long as you're mentally competent, which you clearly are, they can't force you to do anything. They'd need guardianship, which requires court approval and medical evidence of incapacity. And if they try to claim I'm incompetent, then you'll need witnesses to your mental state, medical records proving otherwise, and a lawyer who specializes in elder law. I can recommend someone. I smiled, feeling more confident than I had in months. Do that. And Margaret, thank you. I know this isn't exactly how you plan to spend your retirement. Are you kidding? She grinned, looking more energetic than I'd seen her in years. I've been bored out of my mind. This is the most interesting case I've worked on in ages. As I drove home, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. For months, I'd been drifting, letting my sons make decisions for me, accepting their version of reality. But now I was back in familiar territory, investigating, documenting, building a case. The house was quiet when I arrived. Dennis wouldn't be home from work for another hour, and Sharon was probably at her yoga class. I had time to prepare for what was coming. I made my way to my room and opened my laptop. The first email was from my real estate agent, confirming that my apartment was worth significantly more than I'd expected. The second was from my lawyer, confirming our meeting for tomorrow morning. The third was from my bank, confirming that the bulk of my assets were now safely out of reach. But the fourth email made me pause. It was from Rudolph, sent just an hour ago. Mom, I know this is a difficult time for you, but I want you to know that Dennis and I only want what's best for you. We love you, and we're going to take care of everything. Don't worry about anything. We'll handle all the financial stuff. Just focus on getting better. The manipulation was so obvious it was almost insulting. They were priming me for tonight's performance, making sure I felt grateful and dependent before they revealed their fabricated financial crisis. I typed back, "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm so lucky to have such caring sons. I can't wait to see you tonight." Then I deleted the email from my sent folder and began preparing for war. By the time I heard Dennis's car in the driveway, I had everything ready. My laptop was closed, my research hidden, my expression carefully arranged into the mask of worried gratitude they expected to see. Tonight, they would present their lies, and I would listen with the wide-eyed concern of a mother who trusted her children completely. Tomorrow, they would learn what happened when you tried to con a professional investigator. The front door opened, and I heard Dennis calling out, "Mom, we're home." I took a deep breath and went to meet my fate. And theirs. The dining room had been set with our best china. My best china, I corrected myself, and the smell of pot roast filled the air with the kind of domestic warmth that might have fooled me 24 hours ago. Sharon bustled around the kitchen with theatrical efficiency, playing the role of the devoted daughter-in-law, while Dennis opened a bottle of wine with the careful attention of a man preparing for a difficult conversation. Rudolph arrived precisely at 6, carrying a manila envelope that made my stomach clench with anticipation. He kissed my cheek with the kind of affection that felt rehearsed, his hand lingering on my shoulder in a gesture that would have seemed caring to anyone who hadn't heard his true feelings the night before. "You look good, Mom," he said, settling into the chair beside me. "Rested." "I feel better," I replied, allowing a note of uncertainty to creep into my voice. "Though I've been thinking about our conversation this morning, and I'm a little worried about everything." "That's exactly what we wanted to discuss," Dennis said, exchanging a meaningful look with Sharon. "But first, let's eat." Sharon worked so hard on this meal. The pot roast was perfect. Tender beef, roasted vegetables, rich gravy that reminded me of Sunday dinners when my sons were children. I complimented Sharon's cooking, asked about her pregnancy symptoms, and made all the appropriate grandmother-to-be noises while inside. I felt like I was watching a play performed by mediocre actors. "So," Rudolph said as Sharon served dessert, "we wanted to talk to you about the financial situation we mentioned earlier." "Oh yes," I said, setting down my fork with a slight tremor in my hand. "I've been so worried about being a burden to you both." "You're not a burden, Mom," Dennis said quickly. "But we do need to be honest about the costs involved in your care." Rudolph opened his envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. We've put together a summary of all the medical expenses from your stroke and the ongoing costs from Dad's cancer treatment. My heart pounded as he slid the papers across the table. The top sheet showed a total of $47,382 in outstanding medical expenses that they claimed to have paid on my behalf. I let my eyes widen in shock, my hand flying to my chest in a gesture of dismay that wasn't entirely manufactured. $47,000? I whispered. But I thought insurance covered everything. Insurance helps, Sharon said gently. But there are deductibles, co-pays, out-of-network charges. It adds up quickly. I picked up the papers with shaking hands, scanning the fabricated bills with the eye of someone who had spent 30 years detecting exactly this kind of fraud. They had been thorough, I'd give them that. The letterheads looked official, the medical coding was plausible, and the amounts were carefully calibrated to seem both shocking and believable. But they had made mistakes. Small ones that most people wouldn't notice, but glaring errors to someone who knew what to look for. A billing code that didn't exist. A hospital that had changed names 2 years ago. A doctor who had retired before the supposed treatment date. I had no idea, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. How did you manage to pay all this? We've been using credit cards, Rudolph said, his tone carefully neutral. Taking out loans. It's put us in a difficult position financially. We don't want you to feel guilty, Dennis added quickly. We'd do it again in a heartbeat. But we need to find a way to manage these expenses going forward. Of course, I said immediately. I'll pay you back every penny. I never wanted to be a financial burden on my children. We know, Mom, Rudolph said, reaching across to pat my hand. The thing is, we think the best solution might be to sell your apartment. It's just sitting empty, and the maintenance costs are eating into your savings. And with the baby coming, Sharon added, we're going to need to make some changes to the house. We've been thinking that a nice assisted living community might be perfect for you. Somewhere you can have your own space, but also have help when you need it. I let tears gather in my eyes. Not the calculated performance of the morning, but genuine emotion. Rage, betrayal, and a deep sadness at what my sons had become. You want me to leave? Not leave, Dennis said urgently. Just transition to a more appropriate living situation. We'll still see you all the time and you'll have so many activities, people your own age to talk to. I've actually been researching some options, Sharon said, pulling out her phone. There's a beautiful place called Sunset Manor about 20 minutes from here. They have a waiting list, but if we put down a deposit soon, we could probably get you in within a few months. How much would something like that cost? I asked, though I already knew the answer from my own research that afternoon. About $4,000 a month, Rudolph said. But selling your apartment would cover several years of expenses, and you'd have plenty left over for other needs. $4,000 a month. Nearly $50,000 a year. They were planning to drain my apartment sale proceeds to pay for warehousing me while they lived in my house, rent-free, raising their children with the comfort provided by their theft. That seems like so much money, I said weakly. It's an investment in your future, Sharon said. And honestly, Louise, I think you'd be happier there. This house is so big and empty during the day when we're all at work. At least at Sunset Manor, you'd have constant companionship. What about this house? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Will you keep living here? Another look passed between my sons, and I saw Rudolph give an almost imperceptible nod to Dennis. Well, Dennis said carefully, we've been thinking about that too. This house is expensive to maintain, and with the baby coming, we're going to need to make some changes. It might make sense for us to take over the mortgage payments and handle the upkeep. Take over the mortgage? I repeated, confusion coloring my voice. Just to make things easier, Rudolph said quickly. You wouldn't have to worry about property taxes, maintenance, any of that. We'd handle everything. They thought I was so far gone that I'd forgotten I owned this house outright. They were planning to convince me to sign over the deed in exchange for them taking over a mortgage that didn't exist. I don't understand, I said, pressing my hand to my forehead. I thought the house was paid off. Your father and I paid off the mortgage years ago. You did, Dennis said patiently. But there are still taxes, insurance, utilities. We've been covering all of that since you moved in. And it would be easier for everyone if we just formalize the arrangement, Rudolph added. You get a stable income from the apartment sale, we take care of the house, and you get the care you need at Sunset Manor. When would all this happen? I asked, letting my voice quaver. Soon, Sharon said. I called Sunset Manor today, and they actually have an opening coming up next month. Someone's transitioning out of their care. Transitioning out. Such a delicate way to say that someone had died. Next month? I repeated. But that's so soon. I don't know if I'm ready. Mom, Rudolph said, leaning forward with an expression of gentle concern. We know this is a lot to process, but we really think this is the best solution for everyone. You'll be safe, cared for, and you won't have to worry about being a burden on anyone. We love you, Dennis added, and we want what's best for you. I looked around the table at these three people who were so carefully, so methodically, destroying my life while speaking the language of love and care. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. They had choreographed this entire evening, from the comfort food to the fabricated bills to the emotional manipulation, all designed to make me grateful for my own betrayal. I need time to think, I said finally, standing on slightly unsteady legs. This is all so overwhelming. Of course, Sharon said, rising to help me. Take all the time you need, but not too long, Rudolph added with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The apartment market is really good right now, and that opening at Sunset Manor won't wait forever. I nodded, gathering the fake bills with the careful attention of someone who believed them to be real. I'll look at these more carefully tomorrow. Maybe call my doctor. Make sure I understand everything. That's a good idea, Dennis said. And Mom, we're proud of you for being so brave about this. We know Dad would be proud too. The mention of Steenie nearly broke my carefully maintained composure. They were using his memory as a weapon, invoking the man who had loved me enough to ensure I'd never be vulnerable, never be dependent on anyone. Good night, I said, my voice thick with emotion they interpreted as gratitude, but which was actually pure rage. I made my way to my room with the slow, careful steps of someone overwhelmed by difficult news. But once my door closed behind me, I moved to my laptop with the swift efficiency of a predator preparing to strike. It was time to call Margaret and prepare for tomorrow's reckoning. My sons had just made the biggest mistake of their lives, and I was going to make sure they paid for it in ways they'd never imagined possible. The morning sunlight streamed through my bedroom window as I made the final preparations for what would be the last day my sons ever underestimated me. Margaret's comprehensive report sat on my nightstand, 23 pages of documented fraud that would make any prosecutor salivate. My lawyer, Harrison Wells, was expecting me at 9 o'clock, and by noon, I would have legal protection in place that would make my son's schemes not just impossible, but criminal. But first, I had a performance to give. I dressed carefully in my most conservative outfit, a navy cardigan and gray slacks that made me look every inch the confused, dependent mother they believed me to be. The fake medical bills lay spread across my dresser, and I'd spent an hour practicing my bewildered questions about procedures I'd never had and charges that didn't exist. Dennis was in the kitchen when I shuffled downstairs, his face carefully arranged in an expression of concerned attentiveness. "Morning, Mom. How did you sleep?" "Not well," I said, settling into my chair with a weary sigh. I kept thinking about those bills, about everything we discussed last night. "I know it's overwhelming," he said, pouring me coffee with the solicitous attention of a man who thought he was close to victory. "But remember, we're here to help you through this." "I've been looking at the paperwork," I said, pulling out the fabricated bills with trembling hands. "Some of this doesn't make sense to me. This charge for emergency surgery, I don't remember having surgery." Dennis's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You were sedated, Mom. The stroke was serious. You might not remember everything clearly. But it says here I had cardiac surgery at St. Mary's Hospital. I thought I was at General Memorial." "Sometimes patients get transferred," he said smoothly. "The important thing is that you received the care you needed." I nodded slowly, as if accepting his explanation, while inside I marveled at how easily he lied to my face. St. Mary's Hospital had closed 3 years ago, a fact that Margaret had confirmed was public record. Dennis, I said, my voice small and uncertain, I want to do the right thing. I want to pay you back for everything you've done. But I'm scared about selling the apartment. It's the last connection I have to your father. I understand, he said, sitting beside me and taking my hand in his. But Dad would want you to be taken care of. He'd want you to be safe and happy. You really think assisted living is the right choice? I do, Mom. I really do. The front door opened, and Sharon's voice called out, "Hello! I brought the papers." She appeared in the kitchen carrying a leather portfolio, her face bright with the kind of enthusiasm that comes from smelling victory. "Louise, I have such exciting news. I spoke with Sunset Manor this morning, and they can move up your admission date. You could be settled in by next weekend." "Next weekend?" I gasped, pressing my hand to my chest. "But that's so soon." "I know it seems fast," Sharon said, settling into the chair across from me. "But honestly, it's better to rip the Band-Aid off quickly. And I've brought all the paperwork we'll need to get started." She opened the portfolio and began spreading documents across the table. Admission forms for Sunset Manor, power of attorney papers, a real estate listing agreement for my apartment, and what appeared to be a quitclaim deed for the house. "What's all this?" I asked, reaching for the deed with shaking fingers. "Just paperwork to make everything official," Dennis said quickly. "The deed transfer will make it easier for us to handle the property taxes and maintenance." I studied the document, noting that it would transfer ownership of my house to Dennis for the consideration of $1 and other valuable consideration. The other valuable consideration, I assumed, was their promise not to dump me in a nursing home, a promise they were breaking while asking me to sign. "I don't understand legal language very well," I said. "Maybe I should have a lawyer look at this?" "Mom," Rudolph's voice came from the doorway. I hadn't heard him arrive, and his sudden appearance made me jump. "We've been talking, and we really think time is important here. The longer we wait, the more complicated everything becomes. But I just want to make sure I understand." "Look," Sharon interrupted, her patience finally wearing thin. "We're trying to help you here. We've found you a beautiful place to live. We're taking care of all your debts, and we're handling the sale of your apartment. All you have to do is sign a few papers." "The apartment sale?" I looked up in confusion. "But I haven't agreed to sell it yet." "You said last night that you understood it was necessary," Dennis said, his tone taking on an edge of irritation. "We've already contacted a realtor." "Without asking me?" "We're trying to streamline the process," Rudolph said, moving to stand behind my chair. "Mom, we know this is hard, but you need to trust us. We're your family. We love you." I looked around the table at the three faces staring down at me with expressions that ranged from fake concern to barely concealed impatience. This was it, the moment they'd been building toward. They wanted me to sign away my life while they watched, confident that their confused, dependent mother would do exactly as they asked. Instead, I smiled. "You know," I said, setting down the deed and reaching into my cardigan pocket, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app that had been running since I'd entered the kitchen. The red recording indicator glowed clearly on the screen. "What's that?" Sharon asked, her voice sharp. "Insurance," I said, my voice suddenly clear and strong. "Something I learned in 30 years of investigating fraud. Always document everything." The change in the room was immediate. Dennis went pale. Rudolph stepped back from my chair, and Sharon's mouth fell open in shock. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Dennis asked, but his voice had lost all its false warmth. "I'm talking about the fact that you just tried to coerce me into signing fraudulent documents based on fabricated medical bills." I stood up, my movement suddenly sure and strong. "I'm talking about the conversation I overheard 3 nights ago when you planned to steal my money and dump me in a nursing home." "You were listening?" Rudolph's voice was barely a whisper. "I was getting tea when I heard my loving sons planning to commit elder fraud against their own mother." I picked up the fake medical bills and began reading. "St. Mary's Hospital, closed 3 years ago. Dr. Patterson, retired in 2019. Billing code 99281, doesn't exist." Sharon sank into her chair, her face ashen. "Louise, we can explain." "Oh, I'm sure you can. You're very creative. But you made one crucial mistake. I pulled Margaret's report from my cardigan and set it on the table. You tried to con someone who spent 3 decades catching people exactly like you. Dennis reached for the report, but I pulled it back. That's a complete forensic analysis of every document you've presented, every fabricated charge, every non-existent procedure, every fraudulent bill. It's very thorough. Mom, please, Rudolph said, his voice breaking. We're in trouble. You need to face the consequences of your choices, I said coldly. You spent months pretending to care for me while planning to rob me. You used my love for you as a weapon against me. But we do love you, Dennis said desperately. No. The word came out like a gunshot. You love my money. You love my house. You love the convenience of having a built-in babysitter for your children. But you don't love me. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up a manila envelope I'd placed there earlier. This contains copies of everything: the recording, the forensic analysis, documentation of your real financial situations. One copy is going to the district attorney's office. Another is going to Adult Protective Services. The third is going to the State Insurance Fraud Division. You can't, Sharon whispered. We have a baby coming. You should have thought of that before you decided to commit felony fraud. I moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and you might be interested to know that I've moved all my assets to accounts you can't access, changed my will to exclude both of you entirely, and filed an injunction preventing any of you from making medical or financial decisions on my behalf. Where will you go? Dennis asked, his voice hollow. That's no longer your concern. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the 3 people who had systematically betrayed me. But you should know that I'm keeping the house. My name is on the deed, and despite what you seem to think, I'm perfectly capable of living independently. You can't throw us out, Sharon said, desperation making her voice shrill. We have nowhere to go. You have 30 days, I said calmly. That's more than the law requires, and more consideration than you showed me. I walked out of the kitchen and headed for the front door, leaving them sitting in stunned silence around the table where they'd tried to destroy my life. My car keys were in my purse, my important documents were in the safety deposit box, and my lawyer was waiting to finalize the protective orders that would ensure my sons could never threaten me again. As I drove away from the house where I'd raised 2 children who had grown into predators, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: freedom. They had underestimated Louise Morrison for the last time, and they would spend years paying for that mistake.